Hi everyone, so before I get into my mental health story, I just wanted to come on here and say, before you watch this, please be mindful that there will be trigger warnings throughout, talks of suicide, eating disorders, self-harm, and of course mental illness. So please don't watch this if you are in a vulnerable place right now. I also wanted to say that I won't be disclosing everything because obviously this is very, very personal to me and I will only be talking about the parts that I wish to talk about. So please just respect my privacy. And without further ado, I guess let's just get on into it. This all started a long time ago. I'd probably say the first time I recall actually feeling not quite right was when I was about 6 years old. There was an event at school that happened which led to me being completely traumatised, and from then on, I suffered with some severe anxiety that even my parents didn't really know about because I kept it to myself. A lot also went on in my personal life, from when I can remember, through till now, which I can't unfortunately disclose, but all I'm going to say is it affected me massively. Things started to get worse when I was about 12 years old. I convinced everyone I was that happy friend, you know, the one that danced at parties, but deep down I was really hurting inside, and that's when I started to hurt myself. I really do remember that first ever time that I took something sharp to my wrist, and I remember thinking inside, should I really be doing this? And then I just did it. And then it continued. Day after day. Then turned into hour after hour. Then turned into minute. And it consumed the next 8 years of my life. Short sleeves turned into long sleeves. And then the school got involved. I really thought I'd tricked everyone with my continuous lying until I was stood in the pastoral office being asked to lift up my blazer sleeves. There was no going back. I had to tell the truth. I wasn't this girl, the one that they all saw. The school then rang my dad immediately, and that's when I realised that things were actually a little bit more serious than I once thought. They asked me to go home because I wasn't mentally stable enough to be in school. Lots of mental health assessments later by doctors, psychiatrists, staff at the primary hospital. They came to the conclusion that I had anxiety and depression and I needed therapy and to go on antidepressants at the same time. After medication changes, therapist changes, all different kinds of changes, things just continued to get worse. Nothing got better, and year 11 was around the corner. My anxiety just heightened in year 11, and it got to the point where I wouldn't go to school, I wouldn't go into lessons, and they had to put me in an isolated room for me to actually come in just to do some work. They also had to send me home at lunch because I wasn't eating at school. I was refusing to eat, and things were just really shitty. My anxiety was controlled by my fear of sick. I had a very strong fear of sick, which is actually called emetophobia, which I then had some therapy for, which unfortunately didn't work. However, I am a lot better now with it. Back then, I was so controlled by this fear. It's so irrational, and I honestly praise my teachers for really trying to work with me during this time. I was so stubborn and I would take absolutely nothing. A hell of a lot went on at school, to be honest, and I really just didn't enjoy it. This one memory will always stick out to me, and it was the time that the pastoral lady tried to force me to go to my English lesson, and we both knew that it wasn't going to happen and I wasn't able to do so because of my anxiety, yet she actually manhandled me and tried to get me into the lesson to the point where I pushed her away, screamed in her face, and it caused the deputy head to actually come out of her office and sort out the situation. I'm very grateful for those teachers that understood me and helped me out during my time there, and they really got me through. So thank you. After leaving school, things really started to look up. I couldn't wait to get out of there and start my dance course at college. Things were so for a little while until I got back to my old habits. Short sleeves became long sleeves once again. Now, don't get me wrong, these 2 years were the best 2 years of my whole life. I made lifelong friends and we had the best times ever. I definitely have the best memories from these 2 years. Even though I was living my best life, things took a turn once again and I down spiraled super quick. And this is where things got messy. I landed myself in a psychiatric ward after multiple suicide attempts. In this time of my life, I was determined to not be here. I didn't want to dance. I didn't want to breathe. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to do anything. I'd lost all sense of hope and I hated everyone because they were just trying to help me and I didn't want help. Don't get me wrong, I had the best friends ever. Those that still support me to this day. And my college tutors were absolutely incredible and I can't thank them enough. But it just didn't cut it. The feeling of suicide was so overwhelming to the point where I obviously acted on it multiple times. I won't go into too much detail into what I tried to do, but I will say that my college tutor saved my life. I was stood on the top floor of my college, looking down, ready to jump, and she came running towards me and grabbed me. And I will forever be thankful for that. I became a shell of the person that I once was, and the psychiatric ward scarred me for life. I was so poorly, and it was time that I received some proper help. I was so ill that I don't even remember these videos being taken. After the admission and the crisis team trying to help, I returned back to college after the Easter holidays, but only for a couple of days because they soon realised that I was too unsafe to be there. This absolutely broke me into pieces because that place was my life. It was show term and I was determined to be there as it was my graduation show. So I gave them 2 weeks to prove that I could be safe in college. After lots of meetings, tears and debates, I finally got to go back after just 2 weeks. I got to perform on stage with my lovely year group for the last time and spend the last few days together as a company. This was the best possible outcome and I couldn't be happier. The summer between leaving my dance course and starting at professional dance college was a little bit rocky, let's just say. There were definitely ups, but also a lot of downs. I remember one day waking up to the police staring over me at 7 a.m. thinking that I was dead. That was a massive shock to the system and I realised that I couldn't go on living like this any longer. I tried lots of different antidepressants but just couldn't find the right one. I started at a big professional dance college in the September and I loved it for the first few months. After that, I realised how much my mental health was plummeting. Although I had some really good friends, it still felt super toxic and the teachers just didn't understand my mental health. A specific teacher actually told me that I had to come off my antidepressants because I was putting on weight and it was unacceptable. At that time, we also recognised that I had a binge eating disorder, but it wasn't looked at and nobody really cared about it. I was told to just stop, which obviously wasn't possible. This was the last straw and it was my cue to leave. It took about a month for me to actually make the decision, but it came to the point where I couldn't even attend classes. I'd completely lost my passion for dance at this point, and it took me a good few months to actually find my feet and realise who I was again. In April, I then started PS Dance. I had a pretty stable year or so, except I lost a hell of a lot of weight and ended up collapsing multiple times at work. I had so many tests at the hospital, but it came to the conclusion that I was only eating half of the daily calorie intake that I should have been. I then started to get those really weird manic phases and depressive phases that I got back in 2017 when I was at college. It got to the point where they were really scaring me, so I decided to take myself to the doctors. We started me on a new medication, but it made me worse. But we trusted the process, and I'm so glad that we did. But at the time, it was absolutely petrifying. The manic highs and the depressive lows were so uncontrollable. I remember around Christmas time 2019, I felt probably the worst I have ever felt in my entire life. I was so suicidal, and my friends and family were trying so hard to keep me here. I started self-harming again, and it became so dangerous. I couldn't stop, and I wouldn't stop. I was going back to the doctors every single week, sometimes twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week, for them just to make sure that I was still alive. I was such a risk to myself. I was self-harming at a whole new level. A few days later, I got my diagnosis from the psychiatrist. He said I had bipolar disorder, and I saw that as a death sentence. That was it for me. I couldn't take any more. I remember spending Boxing Day in A&E, begging for help. They gave me nothing, absolutely nothing, except a number for the Samaritans, which I already knew. I just needed something put in place, anything to help. Their response sent me off the rails, and I was determined to not make it into 2020. I was so broken, and I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I made it into the new year by the skin of my teeth. I was constantly bandaged up at this point, and it actually upsets me to look at this picture. Time passed and I had no choice but to keep battling. I had to stop self-harming and get myself into a better place for the sake of those around me. It was so unbelievably tough having to deal with the manic highs. The mania was just insane. I've never felt that bad before. But the lows were equally as bad. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't talk to friends. It was just absolutely awful. But I trusted the process, and I'm so glad that I did so. My GP was just absolutely amazing. He really did fight for me, and I'm so grateful to have such an amazing doctor. After a hell of a lot of medication changes, appointments and therapy, during lockdown I finally started to feel myself slightly stabilise, which is so weird when you've been feeling so unwell for so long. Don't be fooled, there are some extremely rough times that I find very hard to deal with, but things are actually starting to look up for me for the first time in about 10 years. I'm surrounded by such an incredible network of amazing supportive people, and I'm doing something that I absolutely adore. I'm so glad that I trusted the process with my medication, my therapy, my doctors. It's taken a hell of a long time, I'm not going to lie, but it's made me into the person that I am today. Even though sometimes I freak myself out and think that I'm in mania, I have to remember that I can actually have a good laugh, and I can still be my crazy silly self without having to be manic. I think it will take time, but I can definitely get used to this. And I also need to remember that tears are normal too. I don't have to be completely depressed to cry. And I guess that brings you up to where I am today. I think I've still got a long way to go, but I'm so excited for the future now. I still feel suicidal some days, I still have the urge to self-harm, and I still do feel low, but I can now say that I will choose the right options. It's a hell of a lot easier to manage nowadays, and I have a lot to live for. I will always have bipolar disorder, but it doesn't define the person that I am. I am Phoebe, not bipolar.